Hello, this is Talking Europe on France 24. Welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels for today's show. Now, our attention today is going under the sea. You may recall a few weeks ago how French and British fishing boats faced off in the English Channel over who had the right to fish for scallops. Well, that situation seems resolved for now, but it has raised the spectre of post-Brexit fishing wars between the UK and a host of European nations who currently fish in British waters. Between them, they net catch worth over £350 million sterling annually. So the question then, can the UK really close its waters to foreign fleets legally and practically? Is a fishing war about to break out? With us for today's debate are Swedish MEP and Vice Chair of the Fisheries Committee in the European Parliament, Linnea Engström. Thanks for being with us from the Greens Group. Also with us, we have British MEP David Coburn from the Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy Group and the UKIP party in the UK. Hello.
Hi.
From France, MEP Isabelle Thomas with the Socialists and Democrats Group. Hi there.
Hello.
And Dutch MEP, finally, Anja Hazekamp from the United Left Group. Thank you for being with us. Well, I'd like to start off with a bit of an introduction to the issue for my guests and for our viewers. Our reporters Claire Pacalin and Alexandra Renard have been to fishing towns in southwest England to sniff out some of the fishy issues surrounding this situation.
Shellfish caught a few hours ago off the coast of Devon. But much of it will end up on dinner plates in France and Italy.
If you ask any English person what they want, oh, can you get me a bit of fish? What sort of fish do you want? Cod. They ain't got a clue of eating anything else. That's the only thing they've eaten in the fish and chip shop, see?
Battered cod and deep-fried potato. Fish and chips is a British classic. Unfortunately, the British don't eat most of the various types of fish their fishermen catch. So over 2/3 are exported to other EU countries. If, after Brexit, Britain stops European boats fishing freely in its waters, Brussels could put trade tariffs on British caught fish and push British fishermen out of the market.
Now we're ready to go.
With Brexit looming, Dan the fishman is on a mission to get British people to eat more British caught fish.
I'm ready for you. Look, you can't get much fresher and better than that, can you?
Beautiful.
Pleasure on a plate.
I mean, you live by the sea, but is it easy getting fresh fish, or there are enough
No,
fish?
Dan's the only one.
Almost all UK fishermen voted to leave, hoping Britain would start limiting the amount European boats fish in its waters.
Let's taste it.
But there's no guarantee that will happen. And until British consumers expand their eating habits, British fishermen will still need the EU market to sell most of their catch.
Most of my customers, I would say, in the country here and on the coast, voted out. And I think largely that was a protest vote. And the reality is now beginning to dawn on people, perhaps this was not such a bright idea.
There we go, and you can see a full version of that report by our reporters coming up soon on France 24. Back to today's debate, though, with our guests. I'd perhaps like to come first to Linnea Engström as Vice Chair of the Fisheries Commission. What do you predict will happen to fishing around the UK's waters after Brexit? Will the UK be able to close their waters?
I think this small piece of video footage really vividly shows the immense lies that were told to the British people and to the fishermen as well. So this is the most well-integrated area in the whole European Union. We've been fishing in each other's waters for centuries, since medieval times. So there is no possibility of closing off waters without,
So when you say lies, what do you mean? That's quite an accusation.
That Britain can close off its waters. Of course, they need access to markets. And what we have been saying all along here in the Fisheries Committee in the European Parliament is, of course, access to markets mean also access to waters. So we have to cooperate with this, and we've been doing that for centuries. And there's a very good reason. Of course, fish don't know borders. That's why.
Mr. Coburn clearly disagreeing with you.
Well,
Just come to you
you
first.
must have found the only fisherman in the whole of the United Kingdom who would agree with that. That's absolute nonsense. it's not so much having to worry about our markets. What are you going to do if the south of Spain does not have its paella and its shellfish? The Spanish tourist trade is going to go into the ground. So you desperately need our fish. We have the fishing grounds. You need the fish. You have no choice. So this is all nonsense.
So you're basically saying that you need our more markets, right?
No,
you need
I'm
the
basically
European
saying
market.
you need our fish.
As well, yeah.
we can sell elsewhere.
So in that
We've
case,
got the
Mr.
fish,
Coburn,
and
are
we
you
have every
advocating
right to stop
continuing
it.
as things are at the moment,
We
where
have-
foreign boats can fish in British waters?
What we'll be able to do is we will decide our own fishing agreements
What do
with
you want
countries.
to happen? What do you want to
Well,
happen?
I want Britain to decide its own fishing grounds, what we do with it. We will control that, not the European Union, not a bunch of people in Brussels. It will be controlled by Britain, and we can discuss it with
currently,
our neighbours and have bilateral agreements or whatever else. I can assure you, the more problems that they create in the European Union over this divorce, they're going to store up a lot of hatred, a lot of anger, and a lot of bad blood. And what
Citizens
will
should
happen-
have the
what
right
will happen-
answers from you, and you don't
Well,
have
can
a
I
clear
say what's
answer
gonna
or
happen?
anything.
Of course I do.
I'd like to- sorry,
It's
I'd
our
just like to
fish,
let Mrs.
it's our
Thomas-
grounds.
Ms.
You desperate for fish, you can't
No,
get it.
I think
You have
that's-
to try
I'd
to
like
do
to
a
let
deal
Madame
with
Thomas come in,
Morocco
Mr.
now.
Coburn.
Thank
Madame
you.
Thomas would like to speak.
I think time to shout is closed now, and it's time to discuss and to have a win-win deal, I think, with the UK. That is on the win-win. What is a win-win deal? The win-win deal is to have for UK access to market, for both access to waters, and I add a very important point, is that we need the same rules, because it's not possible to have access to market with different rules. If it's the case, it's not a fair competition. So, in fact, the good deal is to continue as we are. I mean, sorry to say that, but because you see, for example, of course...
Thomas Ubani, he's not playing fair.
For example, what about Scottish salmon? If there are no access to European markets? What about fish from UK if there are not access to UK market? So, and what about waters? Because everybody needs, for example, the case of scallops in Normandy. It's a very good example. UK come to catch scallops in Normandy. It's not fair because in Normandy and in Britain in particular, we have a management of scallops. We install small scallops to grow, and we decided to not fishing during 6 months to protect the resource and the stocks. So I think it's a good management of the resource. And I
But
think
this
we
can
have
be
to
bilateral between France and Great Britain.
Well,
We have been
currently it is
neighbours
bilateral.
before the European Union arrived on the scene. We've been doing it for centuries. It is not a problem. It's only a problem because the European
So you
Union...
accept the access to waters, if I understand
not
what
necessarily.
you say.
On this biodiversity
You have
point-
to play fair. If we...
Can I just move on to this biodiversity point? Unfortunately, the
Well,
debate is very short.
please.
The
and you
European
have
Union are
to
not
count.
playing fair,
please.
and never have,
This lady has
and
no-
we will have the final decision on what happens in our waters.
Mrs. Hazekamp, to you.
Yeah, what we see is that the European fishing fleet has overcapacity. And what we would like to do is send these ships all over the world to fish in other countries' waters. And I think the European fisheries policy is quite destructive. And I hope
Destructive
with
for
you.
fishing
after,
stocks.
Totally agree with you.
after the Brexit, I
Pulse
hope
fishing,
that
scandal.
the United Kingdom is able to have a really sustainable fishing policy in their waters. And because
Which is why we want to stop pulse fishing, which the European Union want, and they haven't stopped it.
Yeah, because what we
I
see
think it's
is
very important to stress that European researchers and British researchers, they are, of course, collaborating together. They have had this very close collaboration on stocks, on quotas, on TACs for many, many decades. So all of this management that we have in the EU, that's been, of course, developed together with Britain.
carbon
And there
fisheries
is
policy is
a
unacceptable
grave
to Great
concern,
Britain.
actually, from
And it's very bad
British
for Europe.
researchers that this will be, that they will not
good
have
for
the same
us,
capacity
for all of us.
to monitor stocks in British
Well, I'd like
waters.
to-
And I
Common
think
fisheries policy is a
that's
disaster.
probably the most important
It's not a
part
disaster.
I
of
would like to
environmental
talk about
concerns
stocks
that I
and
have.
talking about quotas, actually, because there's the issue of waters and territorial access. There's also the issue of quotas and who gets to fish in these waters. And currently, the French government, for example, does not sell. It's banned the sale of fishing quotas, but the British government does allow the sale of fishing quotas. We didn't have time to see it in our report, but we've spoken with fishermen in the UK who say that the average sort of working class family fisherman is being squeezed out by the fact that the quotas are being sold. That's not
To
a
large
European
companies,
issue.
yes, absolutely right.
That's a British government national issue.
But as you say, it's a British government issue, and it's up to British taxpayers, British voters, to make sure their government do the right thing. But that's why we need to get out of the European Union, so these things are decided by British government members of Parliament.
Well, currently the British government's deciding something that the small level
We all
fisherman
know
doesn't
that the
want.
European Union is not a democracy, and the MEPs in Europe have no power whatsoever. Everything's decided at the Commission level. So if you want to have a decision made in the UK, you need to have it made by your Member of Parliament. And that's why we need to get out of the European Union, so that the fishermen can exert pressure on our Members of Parliament to make sure they do what we want.
Linnea
And that's
Engström?
not being
Yes.
part of the
You have no
European Union.
power?
I think this is a very common problem within the European Union, actually. I've heard it from Portuguese fishermen, Spanish fishermen, Swedish fishermen. I'm from Sweden. That, you use this national quota system. Actually, you don't take care of your own fisher population, and then you blame the EU, which quota setting and TACs are, of course, decided by the Council, but the quotas and how they are distributed, that's national competence. But national governments tend to blame EU for everything bad that has happened, like Mr.
good.
Coburn.
Then from now on they'll have to blame
and let me just
Westminster. I
finish.
agree with
And
that.
they don't understand that nothing good, nothing good is going to come out of not cooperating on these very vital issues that is fish stocks, water, oceans and climate. They don't know any borders.
Well, is there
At the
likely to be
moment,
more
probably
cooperation,
European-
perhaps, Mr. Coburn? Is there likely to be more cooperation if, such as the UK clearly at this point wants to do, take back control of its waters and then start a more sort of business level negotiation rather than having it done through the European level? Is that perhaps more
Exactly.
efficient? I'd like to come to the ladies on this side of the table.
When you look at the European level, we have quotas. We have all kinds of measurements in the European fisheries policies. But what we see is that the European fisheries is not sustainable. And even a few weeks ago, the European Parliament watered down legislation and said, well, we can continue overfishing after 2020. And that is one of the UN sustainability goals, to stop overfishing in 2020. And the European Parliament says, let's continue overfishing.
Seems a disagreement
That's
from your
unacceptable.
neighbour.
The question of sustainability, of course, is a very important question. But I think that this question is... it's better to have this question at the European level because, as you said, the fish doesn't know where
They don't have little maps of where they can go.
Absolutely, they are not British or French or I don't know.
They speak fish.
So I think that it's more efficient at the European level to. And I
At the
think
European
that,
level, it's
I
not
think,
democratic.
Sorry, I finished.
It's-
I think
Well,
that
let's just hear Madame Thomas' idea and then you
I
can
think
respond.
that common fishery policy is in progress if you compare before European level first. Of course, it's not perfect, but it's better to have a policy at each national level first. And second, I think that it's very important to cooperate. For example, MSY, it's a very good progress to define quotas, but quotas, as you said, don't come from European level. In fact, yes, European level, but Council, that means member states, no European Parliament. I agree with you with democracy. I think that Europe needs more democracy, but you have to progress, of course. But for the quotas, that is member states. That is not...
We all know democracy is not going to happen in
European
Europe.
Parliament.
It always gets rejected. And more importantly, what are they doing about the pulse fishing? The Dutch are walking around these issues. They haven't stopped the pulse fishing. Pulse fishing is absolutely disastrous
If you've
for our
been
seas.
here, you
And
know
because-
that the Parliament took a ban on pulse fishing. If
Yes,
you've
but
been
they
voting
didn't know.
in
Yeah, I'm
Strasbourg.
sorry, I was voting on it, and I can assure you that the pulse fishing is in trialogue at the moment, and they still haven't banned it. That is nonsense. UKIP voted very strongly on every single issue to do with
so
fishing,
unfortunately,
and my fishermen in
I
Scotland
think we're
do
moving
not
on
want
to
to see that
another
sort of
issue
stuff.
here. Thank you all
Pulse
very
fishing, they're
much
both-
for all of your contributions. Many issues, of course, that we could go into. We will have to end it there. We're running out of time. But thank you all very much. Just like to move on now to our weekly look at fake news from around the EU. It's Fact or Fake. Well, on Fact or Fake this week, have British MEPs, quote, forgotten their staff? This story originated in the UK's Daily Express newspaper. Now, all British members of the European Parliament will cease to work as MEPs once the UK leaves the EU on March 29th, 2019. The newspaper claims that the contracts and salary payments of all 73 of them, though, will continue for another 3 months after that date until the European elections. It also contends that MEPs' staff will receive no such redundancy payments. Well, there are 3 problems with this statement. Firstly, British MEPs' contracts end on Brexit Day, March 29th, not 3 months later. Secondly, the date the newspaper gives for the European elections is in fact incorrect. They'll be held at the end of May, not the end of June. Thirdly, and most centrally to this story, the end of contract arrangements for both MEPs and their staff are not as straightforward as the Daily Express purports. As per European Parliament regulations, MEPs are entitled to a transitional allowance at the end of their term in office. This is equivalent to 1 month's salary for each year they were an MEP. The maximum allowance is equivalent to 2 years' salary. Now, there are limitations on the allowance if the MEP goes into another public service job, and if they receive a pension, they must choose one or the other. Well, as for MEPs' staff, their conditions depend on the type of employment contract that each person signed. Well, that brings us to the end of our programme. I'd like to thank my guests once again, Linnea Engström, David Coburn, Isabelle Thomas and Anya Hazekamp. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you all for watching as well. We'll see you soon here on Talking Europe.